Hi, this is Dr. Vignesh Naidu, Department of Internal Medicine, Yashoda Hospital, Second Bank. And today we'll be discussing with regards to the mental health scenario, and we will be celebrating or taking questions of the mental health, especially during the times of the COVID-19. So we have a couple of questions coming in, and we will answer the questions according to those. Mental health basically deals with how one is handling their emotional, their social, and their behavioral habits. So there is a, what do you say, a sync between three of all of these three particular things. And when there is a balance between these three habits, we say somebody is mentally healthy. But when there is an imbalance, which results in either impact on your social life, or if there is an impact on your behavioral pattern or on yourself or your physical health per se because of excessive stress or mental thinking, we would say that they are suffering from mental health issues or mental illnesses. Now, mental illnesses also, or mental health for that matter, depends on three major criteria that could be biological, biochemical in terms of the imbalances in your brain. Genetics and family health makes a significant contribution towards mental health also, and also life experiences. Basically, people who experience trauma or a scareful event or abuse. So these alter the way one perceives what do you say, the stress around them, or the anxieties or the depressions which they experience, are all coming out of these factors. So the balance or the imbalance of these particular combinations results in somebody becoming mentally disturbed or say developing a mental illness. What basically happens is any pandemic which causes or involves such a large amount of population, also going about and involving all your near and dear ones, there is an increased stress about the probability or the possibility of such kind of infections, or worry about the health of yourself or your near and dear ones. So this definitely tends to increase the stress levels in people who are a bit more vulnerable or a bit more well informed, or people who are ill informed about the particular pandemic also. Yes, sadness and depression are very integral. Anxiety, stress, they all are very commonly used words, but they are very closely related to one another. But what you should realize are they are completely separate entities. So if you look at depression and if you look at anxiety, we can find that 50% of people with anxiety tend to have depression, and approximately the same percent of people or with depression also tend to have anxiety. So it goes vice versa, both ways. Now, the key to looking at this is identifying early symptoms so that you know that you are subjecting yourself, or you are going through changes, or your loved ones are going through changes, and then addressing those appropriately to ensure that they don't progress to something more serious. So the earliest signs that you see is you start losing interest in things which you would normally enjoy doing. People who tend to lose interest in eating, they tend to undereat, or they also tend to overeat to compensate. It's called comfort eating per se. You would also go about and notice that people start becoming a bit more anxious, tend to think more, they don't tend to recollect things easily. Their ability to focus and execute a particular regular chore becomes a little bit impaired. They start obsessing about thoughts recurrently. A particular idea or a notion or a fear refuses to go away despite them doing the day-to-day chores. So when you have things like this interferes with your day-to-day activity, it is one of the earliest signs that the stress is getting to you, and you have to accept the fact that you're having the stress, because the moment you start accepting that you're undergoing stress, you're then going to start looking at mechanisms to cope with the stress. So it is not something which will go away by itself. So there is a lot of reinforcement, there is a lot of social bonding, there is a lot of confidence building amongst yourself, among your colleague friends or your colleagues or community, which is required, which can be done to elevate this from going to a next level. But yes, you can do all of this maintaining the required physical distancing which is there. Well, anxiety is something that everybody experiences, which including normal people. So when there is a stressful event, there is a level of anxiety which makes you more acutely aware of what is happening to you or what is happening in your surroundings. For example, exam is an insult which will trigger your anxiety levels, but it is this anxiety which will help you perform better. But when it comes down to stress or depression, it is a consecutive or a continuous process where you have negative thought which is building up, which impairs your ability to perform, and in fact, it reduces your confidence or your motivation levels or your performance levels. So depression is something which would be going slowly in a downward spiral, whereas anxiety is something that we would experience on a day-to-day basis. How we cope with this now decides whether you're going into an anxiety or a stress disorder, and uncontrolled levels of this will result in mental health, which would further maybe progress to say unipolar disorder, depression disorder per se, or a generalized depression disorder. When a pandemic like this occurs, where it almost encompasses the whole globe, this brings about a very strong level of emotion in oneself, because you are not only now worried about your health, you are worried about your job prospects, you're worried about the health of your loved ones, and there's so many things which come into it, which starts putting, because you feel that there are too many variables which are not in your control, and that starts putting a stress onto somebody. So the idea is to accept it for what it is. You can always exercise the right to do to keep yourself and your loved ones safe, but remember there's a fine line between being cautious and being paranoid. We would suggest someone to exercise all the basic advices which are given out by your healthcare professionals or by the government guidelines, so that you minimize the chance of you and your loved ones being affected by such a pandemic. But we would suggest is not to social distance. It's only the physical distancing which is important. We would suggest you to maintain a healthy routine in terms of physical activity. We would suggest one to ensure that you're getting a basic minimum required nutritional diet. Keep yourself well hydrated. Ensure that you're getting proper sunlight exposure. Ensure that you are emotionally touched with your loved ones. Stay in touch over them with them over Skype or Zoom apps. Ensure that you are in touch with your near and dear ones, which builds both an emotional bond, emotional strengthening, and also as this happens and the way you cope with this particular stress will also ensure that there is a stronger community. People tend to become a little bit more agitated. People might become a bit more withdrawn from the routine self. In the sense, if an elderly person or elderly member of a family has got a daily routine which they go about and carry with confidence, sudden restrictions in terms of moving out of the home or being overly cautious around them would make them uneasily aware of their own risk of contracting such a disease, and by such it can actually impact the confidence levels or the morals of the elderly people. So we should be very careful in how we implement those limited restrictions or the limited movement of them outside of the home. You can increase by giving them responsibilities which they can execute in their daily chores in their very home, to see that they are well engaged and they are integrated into your routine society of life or living of life. They would still be suggested that they don't go outside, because they would fall in the high risk category. But if you look at the neurological manifestations of people who are being affected by stress in such a pandemic, is they might experience loss in appetite. They may not enjoy or relish the foods that they have been taking normally. You would see an altered pattern in the daily routines. You would find them withdrawn away from the family, or you would find them sleeping for a longer period of time. They might experience generalized body pains, or joint pains or stomach aches, or conditions which may not actually be there but might be manifested because of the increased stress levels. So these are the most common things, and they would become a bit mindful, or say unmindfulness will be that they will become a bit more forgetful, because they're not able to concentrate on something that they do. They might miss their regular things which they get wrong. So yes, all of these small things are the early signs that would notice that it occurs in the elderly people. So little bit of positive reinforcement, encouraging them to participate in your day-to-day house chores, have small responsibilities that they can execute, will build the confidence levels of these elderly people and will help them cope with the current scenario. Well, this is the most common ill understanding, or not well understood, I can say. We assume that the extroverts are more affected during such a lockdown, but it is also the introverts who are significantly affected to it. If you know, introvert is somebody who refrains to oneself or prefers solitary this thing, but they have a routine with which they relate to the outside world. say a cup of coffee in a particular coffee shop, spending time, quality time in a garden or a park. These are the connections what an introvert has with the outside world. But with the sudden onset of the restrictions and the so-called physical or social distancing, the little contact with the outside world what an introvert has got is suddenly restricted. So the effects of the lockdown are more predominant in the introverts. So we would suggest them to gradually find alternative ways through which they can still exercise their own hobbies or their link with the outside world, but using the virtual medium per se. When it comes to the extroverts, yes, these people basically are defined by having a very social life per se. And it's not just the social life, the physical contact, is that their brain requires a larger amount of stimulation to keep them going. So now they would have to find a way in which they can stay in touch with most of their colleagues, their friends, their loved ones, and have something stimulating at any given point of time. So, it's not sufficient for extroverts just to stay in touch with them, talk to their colleagues over Skype or video chat. So if you look at what is the trend which is catching on these days, you see a lot of Netflixing which is happening, Netflixing parties, and say a group of friends watch the same movie at a given point of time and they have a live conversation going on either via text or via video stream. So it keeps them or brings them closer together. You are seeing cooking challenges going on amongst friends and families. This is one of the way they are stimulating themselves to stay connected and perform better. So when they indulge in activities such as these, they are not just in touch with their social partners, the social in their social ecosystem per se. They are also constantly stimulating oneself and the others to perform and excel better. There is a need for them to be socially connected or socially relevant, and using such platforms and participating in creative projects such as this will help them or the extroverts cope better with such a lockdown or such a clampdown. See, phobias is something that somebody is scared. A particular routine or a particular object or anything that someone is scared of. So if you look at the most common things, people finding themselves alone, or traveling in a lift, or people going on to large gatherings. These are the most commonly faced phobias that we see. So when we look at addressing a phobia, there might probably two different ways of approach. One would be an exposure therapy and the other would be cognitive behavior therapy. Exposure therapy, for example, I would say if suppose somebody is having a fear of traveling in a lift or spending a short time in a closed environment, we would suggest them that they first start visualizing a lift, in the sense that they would visualize a particular picture of a lift regularly, so that the very image of the lift does not create a sense of fear in them. And gradually then we would ask them to train themselves or imagine themselves getting into a lift, which will not be real, but they would imagine that. So that mentally strengthens their mind that yes, they can imagine themselves entering a lift. And maybe then we would then say or suggest somebody to go to a lift, experience it and come back without actually climbing the lift or going in. And next would be take the lift, maybe just travel a single floor and get out. And then maybe slowly build on that. So when somebody is exposing themselves to their fear in small intervals and in small exposures, it allows them to cope with that. The shock is not too sudden. So when you build on this very gradually, there is a steady but improved adherence or overcoming of one's own fear or phobia. So the other aspect of addressing the phobia apart from the exposure mechanism would be cognitive behavior therapy. So this basically involves in identifying what is the irrational fear what somebody is having to a regular stimuli, and then delinking that particular anxiety or irrational thinking pattern and reinforcing a positivity in them. At the same time, this can be done through, say, psychological counseling. If the thing is too severe and they're not able to respond only to psychological counseling, we can also use pharmacotherapy or medications to help get over or tide over the irrational fear, that is. So when these two, exposure therapy and this, are put in together, we ensure that we significantly find a reduction in the phobias, because the moment they start realizing that it is their own inner thinking or irrational thinking per se, the moment they realize that, the phobia levels in them starts coming down gradually. It's easier said than done, but yes, it definitely tends to help people out. in a sense, social drinking would never affect somebody, or in the basic sense is that if you drink responsibly, I don't think alcohol per se will affect the mental health of a person. But yes, when you take alcohol without control in very large quantities, binge drinking, or you have a pattern to take alcohol on a needly basis, and withholding of alcohol for a short duration makes you irate, that's when we say that yes, alcohol starts putting an effect on your mental behavior pattern. This is a significant problem in Indian family households where the alcohol would be the primary reason for the men being socially distanced or emotionally distanced from their own family members. We would say that somebody is an alcoholic, when there is a significant dependence on alcohol to keep themselves calm or sedated or numb from whatever the underlying reason for them to take it to such an extent is. But the easiest way to say, if somebody would look for alcohol in the very beginning of the day, it is one of the easiest way to identify that the person is alcohol dependent or is an alcoholic per se.